Welcome to the wrap-up. I'm Daniel, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Agatha and Steve. You might be watching us live on a Friday, or you might be watching this on our YouTube channel on another day of the week. I guarantee, though, that watching it on a Friday is definitely going to be a better experience. But I understand that there are, differences in time zones and schedules. We're just happy that you're part of the conversation.
I was going to say, some people tune in live on Saturday morning.
So
we're the Saturday morning
true.
cartoons.
That's true.
Time zones.
Are we the Saturday morning cartoons? I like that.
I like to think so, yeah.
I like to think that. Oh, I miss Saturday morning cartoons.
Life lessons.
Life lessons, entertainment, exactly.
Dabba dabba, do not necessarily show this to your children.
Well, you know what? Maybe these are important conversations to have with your children. There was a recent Twitter thread about a gentleman who was introducing his children to Oriental adventures. Do y'all remember that? That was ablaze on the Twitterverse. But yeah, maybe watch this with your kids. There will be profanity, but the lessons will be profound.
I'm making a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve's face
It
just
sounds like one of those, inspirational posters, put on
you have in the classroom? Oh my gosh!
January 22nd.
I'm just gonna write that down.
Landscape picture and then that over top of it
with the silhouette of someone going like this.
A silhouette dude just on a hill wearing cargo shorts, and it just said,
it'd be me in cargo shorts.
Oh my
see
god!
The outline of
we'll
those
just take one of
pockets.
your pictures of you climbing things that you shouldn't be from your archaeology days, and we just
Definitely
slap
cargo
that
pants
on.
in those.
Yeah. Look. I feel like, listen. I feel like when living abroad and practicing archaeology, I wore cargo pants 90% of the time. 90% of the time, I was outside of an apartment or a hotel room. Outside in the field, I was wearing cargo pants. The only time I wasn't wearing cargo pants was actually when I was in Greece, and I wore skinny jeans the entire time I was in Greece. I know.
Interesting choice.
So it's important to remember that Daniel was younger then, and he didn't know. No one knew, really.
Also, cargo pants are fairly standard within archaeology.
Right?
It's just kind of happens.
There was only one time.
I will say that I've never done it, but I've seen it happen a lot.
I was going to ask. I was like, Emma, did you?
I haven't seen it happen, but I've seen many colleagues make this mistake. Is what Emma was really saying.
Yeah.
I'm now thinking of Nathan Drake in that third Uncharted game when he went to Ubar and he was just wearing cargo pants the entire time.
Where do you think he stores all of the grenades he carries?
In his cargo pants.
You never know when you're going to need to store grenades in your pants. Wait, that sounded weird.
What a great lesson for children.
It's not.
The profound ones will be coming soon.
I'm not going to be repeating that sentence. That's a mistake.
Well, good thing people can watch the VOD at youtube.com/AZNSrepresent. Always plug in. That said, the profound lessons will come later on in the show because we have three amazing guests. From left to right, we have Adam Ali, we have Emma, and we have Kiana. You know them as young mysterious empress from our for the Queen game. Emma, who played her first TTRPG as a paid gig. I don't think very few people can say that. And then our empress, Josha Kiana, fellow Any winner. I'm so happy that you folks are, joining us for this stream because this is a topic that we have been meaning to cover for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it's a dual topic, I will say. One of the common defense that you see, well, it isn't historically accurate. You see that a lot in video games. We saw a lot of that when Kingdom Come Deliverance came out. There was a huge debate about historical accuracy with that game. We see it all the time with Assassin's Creed. And then we're starting to see it in TTRPGs, particularly with like the revival of old school games that are meant to sort of simulate history. So on one end, we're going to be talking about that, and on the other end, we're going to be talking about cultural consultation and sensitivity reading. We're going to try to cover both, and if we don't, it'll just spill over to the next episode.
They're closely related, so it's definitely going to come up.
They're very closely related. But before we do that, I got to ask, do y'all have any news? I know Kiana and I have like a big thing. But the rest of you, do you have any news? Anything you want?
What could that be?
What could that be?
Honestly, I thought you were going to ask if we'd eaten rice today.
Deep cuts.
That's
like,
The answer is yes. I had rice at dinner today.
I didn't eat rice today.
Is rice a carb?
No, it's a life-giving material substance. It is.
It's the foundation of all life.
I thought you were going to say of chi.
We're just going for it.
Okay, but that from me, no, that one's too racist.
Y'all, this is a clowny stream.
Yeah, but you know
well,
what?
It's gonna get heavy, so
it's gonna get heavy. You know what? It's important to have these more casual conversations because I think it allows us to kind of jump between topics. I think it allows us to kind of it makes us feel more comfortable. I feel like if we're not like constantly going like heavy topics. So yeah, and also like last week was kind of heavy. That was my fault. So we'll make it a little bit
it's
more
not
chill.
your fault.
No, not my fault.
I understand.
Yeah,
I understand.
That said, like Kiana and I are in a D&D book.
Yeah.
Like we're not portrayed in it. We're not portrayed in it. These two bespectacled Asians.
More of that.
I mean, we could be.
We could be.
Look great in a book.
Just like replace Volo with Daniel and Kiana walking around.
100% I buy instant buy. Wait, yeah.
But we're contributing authors to Wizard of the Coast's new product that's coming out in March, which is Candlekeep Mysteries, anthology of adventures. It's a bunch of newer writers to the more official D&D industry in terms of writing, and the two of us are in it. We've been secretly yelling about it to each other for like a year, so it's nice to have it out there.
It's nice to be able to shout in public.
Because there was a lot of Facebook messages over the past year that was just like about things
just
over
like
the
holding down the letter A, and then H.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. Look, I'm grateful that we got to be a part of that project because I think it's important to for creators like of color to actually be a part of the D&D process, which is why I'm like so proud that Mackenzie joined Wizards as an associate designer. I think that's so fantastic because I think that, like I said, if we abandon D&D because we don't like the way it currently is or we don't like certain things about it, then D&D, a powerhouse of a game, will just continue without us, and it will become more and more of a product that is unwelcoming to consumers of color. So if we have more diverse people working on these projects, we have games that are more reflective of the diversity of the actual gaming community. So I'm grateful that we got to be a part of that, and I know that like 10-year-old me is just like, that happened. So like I'm excited about that. It certainly.
So my question is, last week I was able to eke out a little bit of information about Daniel's adventure, but I have you now here. I have you now here.
See so the reason why I didn't say everything was because I wasn't sure how much we're allowed to talk about.
Yeah, we're not allowed to talk about too many details about the mystery and stuff.
Can we get like a 1-sentence kind of pitch? Like what is that? What is that flavor?
Yeah, so mine is if anyone has seen me DM D&D, which it's been a while since I've done that, it is very that kind of bullshit that I pull off, which a lot of nothing is what it seems. there's a lot of
Mm.
you'll get one thing, but there's a lot of like moving parts behind it. So you'll see a very idyllic little town, and shit's weird in there, but not at first glance. So that's basically what it is. There's,
I love it.
It's
That's
very
intriguing.
it's Shakespeare meets Fey bullshit. That's kind of the way that I.
Did you say Shakespeare?
Yep, Shakespeare meets Fey bullshit. Like that's
Cool.
kind of the vibes that. It's not super Fey. Like there's no Fey wild in it, but it is that kind of trickery, and things are just not what they look like they are.
Gotcha. So not like a
Midsummer
midsummer.
Nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind like
Everyone's like,
things keep happening. It's reality bending. There's
Ooh.
yeah. So
I'm excited
yeah.
to read it. I'm super stoked for
yeah,
it.
and it's really cool because like I know Daniel, you kind of leaned into a lot of Chinese media for Touchstone for yours, and I leaned very away from that, and it's both very valid ways of approaching it for people of color coming into this space. So I enjoyed that we had that flexibility to go about it.
Yeah, I just went Shaw Brothers D&D. That's what I did.
Yep.
For reasons that,
Candlekeep Mysteries, everyone, wherever you can
yeah, Candlekeep
pre-order
Mysteries.
good Wizards of the Coast
Yeah.
books.
March 16th
Order,
is
yeah.
the day it comes out, I think. Something
The
like
ad
that.
has showed up on my Facebook now, so like D&D is penetrating my life here.
One of us.
I'm like, Facebook, why?
We're all
I
so
go.
sorry.
Emma's like, I go on Facebook to avoid TTRPG people, and then I message Emma. But yeah, let's get into the topic of today's episode of the wrap up, and that's Land of the Rising Sun. Let's just say it, because I think people know what we're going to talk about, because I think it's an important case study for what not to do, both from like a marketing perspective and from like a game design perspective. So on Kickstarter, there is a project called Land of the Rising Sun. It is by Britannia Game Designs. Super ironic. But it's by Britannia Game Designs, and it is an expansion to Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition based on feudal Japan. Now, so far, it's almost at double what it was asking for, and there are 8 days left. But a lot of what the Twitterverse has been talking about as it relates to Land of the Rising Sun is just how many blunders they've made with this project. So our very own Michelle Kilnveen Potter from our Caratur stream basically went out and tweeted, "Not a single Asian name is part of this. And what the fuck is up with the wonton font?" Pretty standard response to something like this. Because I remember a friend of mine privately DM'd it to me and was like, "Hey, did you see this?" And this was like kind of when it started. And I was like, "Oh no." And so naturally I go into our Discord and I was like, "Hey, Caratur folks, hey, check this out."
What you said is, I'm just gonna leave this here.
Yeah, that sounds like me.
That's your play. Yeah,
That's
that's your play.
It's producer Daniel being like, "Talk about this." And let's
I don't know
maybe
if you did that. You did that with the wrap up chat too. You didn't just do that with.
Yeah, you did in the
Caratur.
wrap up chat.
Yeah, I
You
put it
dropped
in
it in
both.
multiple
I
places.
I dropped it in multiple places.
What you do is you basically
scatter.
you took out you took this, you set it out, and then you lit a match and just set it on top of it and waited.
I like to think
Yeah.
of it more as having a long stream of fireworks, and I light one end, and then they just start going off, and at the end of it, it's like, "Happy New Year," the wrap up. Sorry.
All right.
Also, Chinese
Happy New Year.
Lunar New Year is going to happen on a Friday, so we're going to do a Lunar New Year stream.
Oh.
Yeah. But yeah, what was interesting though is when you look at the responses to Michelle's tweet. So I'm going to share it in our Twitch chat, and I'll share it in the description below on YouTube, a lot of the people who were actually involved with the project responded. So one of the people, the artist who chose the font, said, "It isn't wonton, which I found personally offensive. It is a font regularly used to simulate the ink brush of kanji script. Chivalry and sorcery books always have sensitivity reviewers, and the last book had multi-faith advisors. Happy to answer questions." So a lot of the people involved kind of jumped on this tweet and started trying to defend the project. Now, the project on Kickstarter has undergone like a lot of changes. One of the things that they've done is that they have been silently removing things or changing things on their Kickstarter campaign. One of the things that they initially did was that they actually had sensitivity readers and cultural consultants as stretch goals. That has since changed. But I'd like to actually talk about, Land of the Rising Sun and works just like this from the context of historical accuracy. Because there are many things that we see in TTRPGs and board games and video games when creators kind of have to wrestle between, what they see as history, and history itself is very, very biased, but what they see as history and the game experience that they are trying to cultivate. We see this with games like Assassin's Creed, where you have famous historical figures who join into this fantastical narrative. Assassin's Creed's kind of got this like ancient alien vibe, kind of interspersed with characters like many famous figures from Greek history feature in Assassin's Creed Odyssey in ways that are not real and are very fictional. But where do you draw the line between, creating fantasy and creating something that is grounded in history? And this is something that TTRPGs really struggle with, because people, want to be respectful, and they try to keep things as historically accurate as possible. But people also kind of go against that. There are people who will say, you know what, there are parts of history that we really don't need in our modern play experiences. Gender inequality, things like racism. Mm-hmm. We don't want in our games. We don't want as part of our game experience. And we could selectively take these things out, at the level of the product. And then there are people who will say, no, but that was a part of history. So that's kind of what I want to start this conversation on. Where do we sit on this historical accuracy and fantasy divide? Right? As like creators, scholars, and like consumers of TTRPG media. Like I, for one, want to start by just saying that history itself isn't accurate. And I think that's a really important conversation to have. If you're a designer out there and you are working on a game, and you find that you are just like really trying to include all of these historical figures, or you're afraid of blending certain historical periods, history itself isn't accurate. So where do y'all want to weigh in? Like, remember, this is the wrap up. This is just like a casual conversation between like 6 friends on a Friday night about some like pretty heavy topics.
Yeah.
So, Steve?
It's complex for me because here's my kind of read on it. And it kind of takes 2 flavors. You kind of get like a swirl for me here. On one hand, a lot of the oppression and the stuff that they write about could be argued has some basis in reality. That can be argued. But as a designer and as a game designer, you have to kind of make a stance about it. And not making a stance about it, you have to understand is making a stance about it. Mm-hmm. So that when you include that kind of oppression in your game, to say like, to wave your hands and say it was historically accurate and I wash my hands of this, I say no more about this problem, makes you complicit in that oppression. And that is, I stand by that. That is Steve speaking directly to the camera. It's like hard. If you say nothing about it, you then, promote it. So that's one flavor. The second flavor is that I actually, when it comes to historical kind of stuff like this, I am very cautious of any media that tries very hard to be irresponsible about how they portray oppression that has happened in the past. When oppression is erased, I think an unequal but a measurable amount of harm is still being done. And I think designers are stuck in this really difficult spot where they need to both acknowledge and condemn oppressive, systematic oppression. And Land of the Rising Sun fails on both.
Yeah, 100%. I think one thing that people in TTRPGs and people who, create TTRPG content, they really don't understand that, like, most stories aren't actually historical. Instead, that they're, like, inspired by particular narratives that have been passed down from generation to generation. So, for example,
is actually sort of a definition of history,
which is itself a definition of history, right?
History is just narratives.
Yeah, and that's why I like to say that archaeologists like you, Emma, are professional world builders.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. I was basically like throw out a really easy example, and that's Game of Thrones. Right? Game of Thrones is inspired by the War of the Roses, which is, a historical period, right? But it isn't set in Europe, and it doesn't feature any of the real people from the War of the Roses. It's that what we have are like very, very loose analogs for historical figures. And the world of Westeros itself doesn't even share common history with Europe, right? Yet there are going to be people who are like, well, you can't have people of color here because there weren't people of color in positions of power during the War of the Roses. People will say that. You can't go... one of the things when we were testing Ross rifles, my World War I RPG, I actually had a game, and the guy argued with me about how far someone could throw a grenade on the grounds that the athleticism required was not historically accurate. I know.
What the what?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I have played hundreds and hundreds of hours of Ross rifles, and I have seen so many attempts to try to prevent players from playing the characters they want to play on the grounds of historical accuracy. Like, I have people who are like, I want to play, I want to play a woman in the trenches. And then I've had players be like, no, women were never combatants. They were only nurses. You can't do that. I'll be like, no, you totally can. This is fiction, right? But people
also,
will always do that.
You don't know that.
There were women in the trenches.
There were women.
Not
in
even
the trenches.
historians know that for sure, because that is part of the problem with history. And you kind of said it before, Daniel, that history isn't accurate. And I think we need to break down that there's a difference between the past and history or prehistory or whatever it is that historians and archaeologists look at. And I'm going to tell you, as an archaeologist trained within historical methods, that I am highly suspicious of any written documents, and you should be too, because they're always written by people. And like I said, they're a narrative, which means that they're selective. They have to be. You can't have an all-encompassing narrative. It just doesn't work that way. So things are always being left out or changed or highlighted. And so the actual act of being a historian, I think I've ranted about this in L5R and other places, is not doing history. You're actually being a historiographer. You're looking into the background of those sources. You're investigating the larger context. You're trying to get as much information because you can't take written sources at their word. And whenever someone brings historical accuracy as an argument in any such situation whatsoever, I automatically have like alarm bells going off.
Yeah, I
because,
mean, like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we've been talking about how history's been used against inclusion, but we can also say that historical accuracy can still be harmful. And that's what happens with a lot of the Japanese stuff, where they're like, well, we're including all of this because it's historically accurate. And it's like, first of all, what does that mean? Did it just happen at some point, sometime in the Japanese past? And does that mean there isn't connotations surrounding it, a history of this concept being used and reused and being harmful? Like, historical accuracy doesn't make something sensitive or good or even right. And it's one or dominant perspective on a subject. It's not even a done deal. Like, history isn't dry and sealed and actually written in stone or any of those other analogies. It just, history changes constantly. So saying like women didn't fight in the trenches, we just don't know that within the dominant narrative because that hasn't been studied, or things are getting left out. So you can't even say that for sure in quote history.
I mean, even as like archaeologists, we have seen how these decisions are made about the shared knowledge, right? The example I love is when my last trip to China, I found a figurine. It was like a couple thousand years old.
People love figurines.
People love figurines. I found a figurine, and like Chinese colleagues and your supervisor Emma were both like, "Oh yes, this is clearly an animal totem, and it has, and they were like just like going into like crazy detail on how like, oh yeah, this means that they practiced this kind of shamanism and this and that." And I'm sitting there in the back being like, "That's a busty lady." Right? and that was my interpretation of it. Like, I was like, this could be some sort of fertility figure, something like that, like the Venus figurines, right? But like, my interpretation of it is less valuable than their interpretation of it because of their seniority over me, and therefore their opinions become the dominant, form of knowledge. And I say form of knowledge because there are different ways of knowing. And that's something that's very important when you're talking about the past and even the present.
Yeah.
When you were mentioning...
Venus figurines is a good example in general of a thing that I like to point out, which is history serves the present. It's created by the present. It's not an actual representation of the past. It's more a representation of us and the people writing it. And even the term Venus figurines and those interpretations of it as female deities, mother goddess, and a lot of those things are rooted more in like 70s feminist movements. And that doesn't make them unimportant. They're important to these people, but this is a repurposing of things from the past. And we cannot project any of that onto the people who originally created it. And this goes for historical documents. This goes for any kind of site or artifact. Like, this is us doing our thing with what we see as the past and calling it history. And it's constantly going to be different.
Absolutely. And I mean, a big example was, the nationalistic approach to archaeology in China and Japan, and the context in which those two intellectual traditions developed, right? From Japan, the American occupation of Japan, and China, the Japanese occupation of China, and how archaeology is used as a tool for nationalistic gain in those nations. In China, they take, historical documents, like, the histories written by great scholars at face value, and will try to basically validate historical documents and books using archaeology, right? Or, using or overlaying. Oh, and a big thing in China is if you ever go to China and you travel from like small province to small province, you'll notice that all of their like Neolithic cultures, so these are cultures that didn't have systems of writing that we are able to understand. The cultural borders of those Neolithic cultures actually correlate with modern political borders.
Yeah.
Because
they're like, the culture exists here. I'm like, that's awfully
the culture exists here, therefore the government should give us funding. And it I just by working in China, I learned just how malleable history is. Just how malleable history is. And I've been behind the scenes, I've been trying to look. Emma, do you remember, this was like a long time ago when when we were in our early graduate school careers, but I think it was a Chateauhoyuk, but there was that paper that somebody wrote, a really famous paper about stone phalluses at Chateauhoyuk.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that?
I think it's Ian Hodder wrote a book about, or not a book, an article all about how like the discussion of female bodies and representation in ancient art is overblown, but because there's also a lot of dicks.
There's a lot of stone dicks. Lying
And
out there
essentially,
in
this paper was just an archaeological ode to dicks, and I thought it was the funniest thing ever.
I get it. I know where they're coming from.
I get it, because I remember that class, because we were both in that seminar, and everybody's talking about this paper. But yeah, I think there's some really interesting conversations to be had about history, because, and I kind of want to segue this into the conversation about cultural consultation, sensitivity reading as it relates to like historical fantasy, but also just like the history of contemporary pulp literature, from like Conan the Barbarian and H.P. Lovecraft.
There's a blurry line for people between culture and history.
Absolutely.
Before we get to that point,
Yes.
I kind of want to discuss how much of history depends upon our individual perspectives. So a lot of backlash are from people who do not know all historical perspectives. This is going to veer into video games for a split second, but I assure you it's important. When Battlefield 1 first came out, there was a black man on the cover. And this is a video game that had its main narrative and its multiplayer take place during the Great War, or World War I. And they said this was historically inaccurate. That is not true. African Americans did fight the Great War along with many other different kinds of Americans. It got even further into criticism when in the single player, a Muslim Bedouin woman was one of the characters that you were playing as. And I specifically bring this up because of the comment of women in the trenches. A lot of our perspective of women in the trenches come from a very American/British perspective of how we treated women in combat. It is not necessarily true of many different cultures that were also part of World War I and World War II, not to mention other wars. Not to mention many of the places where we consider the front lines were not always the front lines. And there were different places, like the Arab Revolt in the Great War, which indeed Muslim women would fight in, that we tend to ignore or omit from our popular culture understanding of history. So even when these things are written down, because of our perspective, you know, as individuals who may not be educated in all the facets of history, because we can't be, we tend to cry lack of historical accuracy when in fact things are very accurate indeed. And a lot of it has to do with how history's taught and how we choose to teach history and what perspectives we choose to share, which are very often North American centric in these two countries, in America, and actually all of us are Canadian. But you know, in my other home country of Britain, very British perspective, and very white.
Yeah, I mean, like,
that's a lot.
I mean, in World War I, there was the first Russian women's battalion of death. First of all, what a badass name!
Hell yeah!
What a badass name! Like the way I see it, like nobody should ever claim that history is the absolute truth. I feel like history is so messy, and it's like, I imagine like history being this like sheet of paper, and somebody's been trying to write on it, but they're not writing on a flat surface, so their pen is just going through the page and leaving holes everywhere. I feel like that's what history is, right? And
times that by millions, because a lot of people have pens on that paper.
But everybody's like,
yeah,
exactly. Until you just get like the scrap. Looks like confetti. That's history, right?
Yeah.
And all the different parts that are missing, that's where the sources have been lost, destroyed on purpose, right? Or
never existed,
right? And this is happening. That is like, that's the best way to describe like sort of the intellectual pursuit of understanding the story of humanity.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. And I want to spin this out too, because just even stepping it back further, like our knowledge is not objective. That's just how it is. So there's epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, and particularly how knowledge is created and how we use it and develop it and all that stuff. And so a lot of our Western concept of knowledge is that it is an objective thing that is not influenced by the individuals who are creating or using it. However, that is not what happens at all, because what we see, how we see the world and how we exist within the world all depends on your specific identity and the intersection thereof. So, you know, your gender, your race, your class, where you exist in the world, like geographically, and all of those things come together, disability, you know, there's so many of these different intersections of where how we interact with society is different and how society interacts with us is different. And therefore, how we view certain events happening are all different, even though the same event may have been, you know, so like, you know, if a ball drops in the middle of a shop, the shopkeeper, the customer, a random bystander who's just walking past the shop are all going to have different ideas of what happened because they are perceiving it through their own perspective. Mm-hmm. And that is just with knowledge in general. And then we get into history where it is, as has been pointed out, literally impossible unless you existed in that time to know what happened. And so therefore the only way we are viewing it is through the views of other people, which are then, again, the intersectionality happens. And because of how, you know, how academia works and how history works, the dominant views that we have been seeing are white, cis, het men, older men in the space. And because they are given seniority, therefore we have confirmation bias, where therefore all of the information we are viewing, we're trying to fit into this cohesive, quote unquote, narrative that is already being built. And anything that sticks out is therefore not accurate, even though it is just another perspective in this narrative of history. And so we need to kind of look at, and this also goes for like cultural stuff too, like what is culturally accurate is entirely dependent on your perspective. What is historically accurate, what is culturally accurate for me as a Chinese Canadian diaspora who was born and raised here, whose parents were mostly born and raised here as well, is incredibly different from somebody who is, you know, a Chinese person who immigrated here 5 years ago, and different from someone who immigrated here 10 years ago, or any of those other experiences. And so cultural accuracy is also not this hegemony that we think it is. And I think we need to be, you know, I always say historical accuracy in the Western idea is a false god. It is not something we can ever live up to. We have this ideal that there is something that we can come back to. And we also have to look at why people want to be, why they want to play games that are historically accurate. Why is that a case? And a lot of the times what we see is that people want to be a historically accurate game because they want to live that time. They want to experience a different time. And at that point, it's no longer about historical accuracy because you're self-inserting yourself into a narrative of history. Like, if you're playing a game that takes place, like, I don't know, during the Great War, like, you're already creating a new narrative within this history. It's no longer accurate because you were existing in that space as a player making new things. And therefore, it's less about accuracy and more about what kinds of stories we should be telling because of that specific person's perspective of certain events within history.
Yeah, I mean, like you even said, like if you went back, the only way you would know what really happened is if you went back in time and saw that. Even if you did that, you're still seeing, you know, you were still learning about history from a single perspective, right? I think one thing that, you know, we should be talking about is that, you know, from like Kiana, you talked about like the practice of teaching history, and Emma, you've talked about this as well. Like the practices of teaching history are very much practices of collectively upholding blind spots that we have in history, right? Collectively upholding blind spots that we have of the past. there was this thing that I don't know where I got it, but there's this concept called willful awareness, and it's from The Person You Mean to Be: How Good People Fight Bias. And it says that when we deliberately open our minds to the things we choose not to see because they make us uncomfortable, with the aim of counteracting our unconscious bias. Willful awareness helps us challenge our thinking and consider information we may have previously not noticed. Okay. Now, there's this thing that we were talking about in our wrap-up Discord channel, and it's the idea of being cultural voyeurs. Right? We talked about this. You mentioned, Kiana, you said, why do you want to play in this historical time period, right? And on one end, many people may answer, well, I just want to, experience the past. Some other people might say, well, I would like to experience the past in a way that I feel more seen, right? Both are accurate, right? And then there are also people who play games that are set in the past, but they want to continue to uphold the kind of power that they have in the present based on their own privilege. And that's something really important to talk about. Because we have a lot of people who, fetishize feudal Japan, fetishize certain aspects of other cultures, and not just Japan and not just in TTRPGs. People fetishize and consume and profit off of depictions of these cultures, but from a position of power, a position where they don't have to experience, harm or oppression. Right? There are people who, for example, there are people who might say, I want to release a TTRPG about, being a Chinese person in the 1930s and having Japan invade, and you have to escape, and it'll be thrilling and action-packed. But you're a white person, and you don't actually have to experience that, like the trauma of having your families killed off, having your families put in camps, having your history erased, right? So it's the same thing. The same thing goes for like how we consume music, right? The same thing goes for, yeah, sorry, Emma, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is something I've thought about a lot too, is the cultural voyeurism or playing within a culture as well. I think there are a lot of cases where taking that same culture but playing with an element of it from its past is almost considered like a safe space because it's history.
Yeah.
You can go there. You're not commenting on the current culture. You're going back to the history, but that connection between history, representation of history, and current day cultures cannot be separated.
Yeah, of course, because history very much informs contemporary culture.
So a lot of the things that I come across with Japanese stuff is hey, I'm going to say this is harmful for a lot of Japanese people in Japanese diaspora now. And what I'll get in response is, oh, but it's historically accurate. In which case I will like clench my fists and calm down for a second. But like, it's something we've seen in other places where the past is considered a safe space to explore what you want. And the more removed that past seems, the more you're allowed to do what you want in a lot of ways. And you have to wonder, with some of these fantasy settings that are drawing on other people's histories, like, what does that mean for current cultures and individuals of that culture? Like, you can't pry those apart.
Yeah. I'd like to actually kind of, we've almost hit that 1 hour mark, and I kind of want to steer the conversation into consultation, because that's what you mentioned, right? I know that like Agatha, myself, Anna-Marie, you, Emma, and Kiana, we've all worked as consultants in the TTRPG space. And so Modifius had a project called, it's just the Conan role-playing game, and they put out some updates on Conan the Wanderer. Now, this Conan Kickstarter campaign...
Actually, before we get into that, I just wanted to make sure, Agatha, I know you've kind of like been listening and nodding along and stuff. Did you have any last thoughts about Land of the Rising Sun? I know we've been like dunking on it and going all over the place, but was there anything you wanted to add in here?
Aw, Steve,
Aw.
co-host. That co-host energy. No.
Cool.
I think everyone had really great thoughts. So
I figure Agatha would have just chimed in.
I never
But
know.
no.
I like asking.
Yeah, no, that's asking is always better.
Yeah.
That's why we're a team.
Conversation.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but let's talk about Modiphius.
So, I don't want to talk about Modiphius itself. I want to talk about the fans. Well,
Some of them.
Some of them. Because I
should also. I thought of this earlier. I keep interrupting you, and
No,
I'm
that's
sorry.
fine.
But when we were talking about the Land of the Rising Sun, we should specify that the people that did fund this aren't necessarily bad people. And
correct.
if you were excited about this for various reasons, like, we're not saying that's wrong or you're bad, but like,
I think we've said it a lot on this stream and on the podcast.
Yeah.
Amar has done
You could-
this amazing job of
Yeah, he keeps talking about your tweet. But I would just say, like, you could like things that are problematic and have problematic elements in it. I think the important part is being aware of the fact that those things are problematic. Like, my example is I really love The Office, and there are so many things wrong with that show and the characters involved. But it's a show that I enjoy. I don't know if that makes me a bad person. I don't think it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You like, better example. I like Vampire the Masquerade. That is a host of problems.
Nah, you're just bad. No.
damn.
I'm just kidding. Adam Lee, you know I love you. You know I love you.
This is
Knives
all
out.
just to say that we're not going to lump all of the people
Yeah.
that are interested in Conan or this Kickstarter into this category of the fans that were responding in the particular manner that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and specifically, I'd like to shout out Lee Gold, who is one of the creatives for Land of the Rising Sun. I have a lot of respect for her being someone who's been in the TTRPG in the D&D space since like the 70s or so, and done a lot of very positive work for representation and whatnot. So I believe truly that Lee Gold, if she were to listen in and listen to this conversation, would take our points to heart. And maybe not agree 100%, but be willing to listen to people who speak from their hearts and from their own true, honest experiences.
This is kind of a lesson that I've learned throughout my experience in the TTRPG industry, which has been several years, and mostly as a community person. It depends. It all comes down to this. How much do you prioritize your own enjoyment and fandom compared to a community's harm? You can have enjoyment, and I encourage you to. You can be a fan of something, and I encourage you to. Make sure that when it comes down to a community's harm, you're still able to prioritize, listen, understand, and develop from it.
Yeah. So let's go into this Conan update. It's update number 145. I shared it in the link. It's also in the YouTube description down below. Samuel Webb, a collaborator on this project, posted on November the 9th last year, Conan the Wanderer edits. So it's in the Twitch chat if you want to follow along. There's a very lively conversation, a battle that I will continue to fight against Anima Lee. We're all in Toronto except for Anima Lee. Pickering's not Toronto.
Oh my
Nobody
gosh,
cares
why
about
are you
this.
bringing it into the stream?
Yeah,
Keep
and
it
a
in
the
YouTube
chats,
video
Daniel.
where no one cares about this debate.
I know.
Literally
The
nobody
people watching it are
cares
just like,
except for
we just like,
us
viewership
six.
just went. Anyways,
Let me defend myself. Daniel. I can walk one street west, and I'm suddenly in Toronto.
but that
Right.
doesn't
Do you
mean
wanna
but that
be-
doesn't mean you're in Toronto. Then if you have to walk to get into Toronto, it means you're outside of Toronto.
Oh.
Also,
Yeah,
like, who
Daniel.
cares?
Yeah,
Like, it's
let's
Toronto.
have this us and them dichotomy.
Okay, that we needed to. The reason why I brought that up is because I feel like we need to have some laughs before we get into this because it has
Yeah.
been
A little reset. I appreciate
a little
that.
emotional reset. I think is really important for this stream. So that's why I did that, Agatha. Also because I love this
it.
battle that Anima Lee and I have been having for weeks at this point.
I didn't really care. I'm not Torontonian. It's
No, I
fine.
don't even care. If I could see you in person, we're in the same. And it takes us like we could get on the subway or a train to see each other in person. We're in the same city, basically. Anyways, Samuel Webb posted a lengthy blog post about how Modiphius had utilized a cultural consultant to make some changes to Conan the Wanderer. And, I thought that the changes they were making is really good. Now, Conan the Wanderer is a source book. If you look at the Conan the Wanderer cover, I mean, the cover's got some problems. It's on DriveThruRPG. I'll throw it into the Twitch chat if y'all want to take a look. But it's in that classic Robert, and I say classic, that Robert E. Howard sort of look. It's got that art. It's got Conan, and it's got a woman wearing not so much clothes and a strange elephant creature. Now, if you go to Conan the Wanderer, the source book on DriveThruRPG, the first thing you see in bold letters is "Welcome to the Mysterious East." Okay, and the text is, it says, "Danger breeds caution, and only a wary man lives long in that wild country where the hot Vendian plains meet the crags of the Himalayans," which I'm assuming is supposed to be the Himalayans. That's just lazy. An hour's ride westward or northward, and one crossed the border and was among the hills where men live by the law of the knife. Conan the Wanderer is an essential guide to the kingdoms of the East, a land barely explored by Conan during his illustrious lifetime. Nowhere in the Hyborian world. Nowhere in the Hyborian world is such a rich and varied array of countries, ranging from the rocky hills of Afghanistan. What country?
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. What country do you think that is?
Oh no, I don't know.
I don't know. Canada? The rocky hills of Afghanistan, to the untamed steppes of the Hyrcania, to the steaming jungles of Kitai, to the opulent palaces of Old Vendia. That's this book, and they made some changes to it. They made some updates to it. And as many companies do, they will use their Kickstarter page as a way to basically blast marketing at people. Super common. Free League does it all the time. So they wrote on their Kickstarter update that we made changes to Conan the Wanderer on a cultural consultant's recommendations that created a more well-rounded and well-developed representation of the fictional cultures based on their obviously real South and East Asian counterparts. Word choices were edited throughout for tone, like removing exotic and mysterious, replacing it with a better adjective to describe its peoples and places, so that players inhabiting Eastern characters in their games aren't just a stereotype of strange, unknown people, and place them at the center of this book. This was an issue for us in the original version, as it often assumed to paint all Eastern characters with the same brush, instead of inspiring a sense of rich societies and cultures. For example, the martial arts talent tree title was changed to reflect our editorial view, as associated unarmed combat with Eastern peoples has a poor tradition of Orientalism within the hobby, when there are counterparts all over the world. Instead, they are now called unarmed techniques. The Lotus Road section was edited so as not to overemphasize it as a drug route, because Chinese drug dealers is another vicious stereotype used in stories to portray East Asian characters as a threat to the Western world, and it is not something we wanted to publish. These are great changes.
Yeah,
right? These are great changes.
Totally reasonable response.
Somebody messed up and then didn't edit anything on DriveThruRPG. So Modiphius, first of all, good job.
And then all of the comments are just fart noises.
Yeah. So, but before we get into the, okay,
this is. I did want to point out that they did have a caste system as well, specifically in their India counterpart, that got toned down, so it's not absolute and all-encompassing. Mm-hmm. So it's not just an East Asian thing. This was like a large part of an entire continent often gets attributed to the East, and is thus simplified down to the point of practically non-existence, which is where harmful stuff like the Wanderer's initial offerings came from. So to see them get really given color, uniqueness, and also to not be as strict as they were, the caste system especially is a thing Like, it's a real thing, and not even just in the past. It's a real thing now.
Yeah.
But to expand more upon what that looks like and to tone it down so it's very clear that not everyone is necessarily part of a cast, it's not just a positive change, it more clearly looks like history.
Yeah, and I think what's also really important here is that they have made an active effort to help players portray characters from these lands, not as foreigners traveling to them. Right? This is something that we saw with the map for Land of the Rising Sun, where when they shared that up the map, they had the Great Oriental Sea.
Yeah.
Right? And it was never more obvious that a team of British game designers oversaw that map. But I want to actually draw our attention to something here. In this update from Modifius and the Modifius team, they said, the material is and always has been wholly faithful to Robert E. Howard. We're not changing anything about the setting or the world. Not a single word of Robert E. Howard's text has been altered. Only adjustments are being made to the game content itself, or fiction we've derived and extrapolated from his works, particularly the way we discuss and present that material. In discussing these concerns with Cabinet themselves, I don't know what that is, they confirmed to us that anything new that is published derived from Robert E. Howard's work is pastiche, and as such should be fitting for a modern audience. This new version of Wanderer and all of its changes was approved by them. I guess Cabinet is whoever owns the IP for the Conan world. And then they said Orientalism, particularly in gaming fiction, has been a trend and trope for many years that has made our East Asian friends, I would have just said Asian friends, East Asian friends within this hobby feel unwelcome and regarded as strange. With these edits, we present a more well-rounded, better developed, and above all inclusive expansion to the Conan role-playing game. This is solid, right? And this is the kind of action that we would love to see. And this is Modifius putting, their money where their mouth is. I remember when Conan the Wanderer came out and everyone on Twitter was talking about it. I was one of those people that was talking about it. And it was nice to see that they are making an effort to alter a product.
That's pretty much already done, too.
Yeah. So, yeah, they went back and they were like, okay, we published this thing, but that doesn't mean we can't update it. And, Wizards did that, of course. They did that with Curse of Strahd. So we'll give them credit for that. Now, if we go and we look at the comments, though, the comments are where, it's real upsetting. It's real upsetting because most of the comments were like, take your politics out of my Conan the Barbarian.
Or this has delayed the release of the game, and what is this all for anyways? They can't handle words like exotic and mysterious. That's one of the ones I read and regretted.
Or this is a game, not real life. There's one person who said, indeed, this is a game. It is not real life. It is a pity, then, that real life was allowed to enter into it. And this is the comment that I want us to kind of talk about, because this is the one thing that we see, and I'm sure this is something that, Steve and I experienced so much of this when we first started streaming on this channel, Reading Oriental Adventures, right? It's just a game. You don't need to be upset about it, right? So let's talk about that. This is a game, not real life. Real life, it's a pity that real life was allowed to enter it. Here's the thing. Real life is already in your game. Real life is already there. Real life is the foreign invader that you get to be as. Real life is the power and privilege that you have in reality that you get to replicate in game. Okay? I hate that answer. It's just a game. Because the people who say it's just a game when somebody speaks up about harm are the kind of people who A, feel uncomfortable because someone's challenging their privilege, or B, the kinds of people who, don't care about others. They're selfish. They're people who, would just They want worlds full of bigotry. They want worlds where they are enabled to do horrible things, right? They want worlds for themselves, right?
I will also note that this is one of a series of arguments often made where if we point out what's not okay about a product, sometimes you'll get like, well, it's historically accurate. And you'll say like, here's the problem with that argument. And then they'll be like, oh, well, it's just a game anyways.
Mhm.
So it's like a series of shutdowns that often happen. Luckily, I haven't faced this as a consultant or a sensitivity reader, but it happens a lot on like Twitter and out in the world and on these Kickstarters where it's like, if it's like your arguments are never good enough in a
Mhm.
way.
Yep.
There's always a response to it.
It's the changing goalpost, and
Yeah.
it's why all this conversation is when we center around stuff about historical accuracy, cultural accuracy, and examining the harms that can come from trying to chase that. It's the fact that what is the intention here? It's why I go back to why do you want to play in a historically accurate game? Like, what is the intention there? For some people, the intention is I just want to play I think there's someone in the comments that said, I want to play a racist person. And if I went back in the past, that racism would have been accurate. And that's, and therefore when someone calls them out to say, hey, history wasn't actually leaning into that bigotry the same way that you thought it was, surprise, there were people of color in medieval Europe because boats existed and people walking existed.
Yep.
Just
There's
things that people can travel and existed. Like, they're like, oh, but now you're projecting real life, aka modern politics, into it. Whereas, we've already talked about, we're already projecting ourselves into it. And maybe and like I said, if our intention is to explore a historical event and have an interesting story out of it, you're not being historically accurate, and that's fine, right? If your intention is to I think this time period is really cool, and I think there'd be a really interesting story in here, you can't claim that your thing is historically accurate because that's not your intention. If your intention is to play a bigoted asshole, better own up to it, right? And you can't hide behind those things because the moving goalpost just gives you away, right? So that's kind of the whole concept here, is that people keep saying this because their intention is not, I want to play something historical, or their intention is not, I want to play in the world of this person, of this creator. It's usually something else, and that something else is usually something that we should be calling out.
There's also a second thing that I've noticed, a second trend, even though it's related to much of the same behaviors. The belief that by accepting new people into the hobby is being taken from you.
Well, it's gatekeeping.
So, gatekeeping. So we see it, we're actually seeing a lot in the comments of this Bodifius Kickstarter too, but it's happened with Vampire the 5th edition, with its changes, some terrible, but some rather good. It's happened with the newest edition of Werewolf, even though no one knows what it's going to look like yet. It's happened with parts of D&D, and on and on and on. This belief that by granting access to other people, or by letting them play a game safely, because the truth is a lot of us have been playing role-playing games for quite some time. We've always been here. But yeah, by allowing you to play it safely and more openly, we are losing access ourselves. And that's simply not true. You're still welcome in most of our spaces. We're not creating exclusionary zones, right? But this persistent belief is the same one that derives a lot of racism, Orientalism, sexism,
Bigotry.
homophobia, bigotry, because it comes down to this persistent belief that there's a limited share of resources. And so only some can be given to those who are diverse, or we shall lose access. And the fact is, this is a game. They may only print so many books, but there's ways to access those books, even if you can't get a printed copy. And you can find people to play with it almost anywhere. And if not in person, like the majority of us right now, you can play online. there are always resources. There is no limited amount. So there is no need to keep gates.
There's also,
in fact, there should be no gates. Yeah.
There's also like a time where you should think about that, not just from an access point of view, but that sense of that something's no longer for you. Where it's like, this isn't my version, this isn't for me. It's like, welcome to the experience of being a marginalized person where things are not for you. Think about how that feels for a second. I don't really have a whole lot else to add to that other than
there's a different lens on the exact same thing, Adam, that you're saying, is that oftentimes in business spaces, people will talk about how there's a pie and people will want bigger slices of a pie. And the implication here is that if you get a bigger slice, someone will get a smaller slice. But that is based on like a falsehood, because in real life, you can always make a bigger pie. The pie can always be bigger. There's very few instances where the pie can't be bigger. So when you say, I'm getting a bigger slice of the pie or someone else is getting a bigger slice of the pie, therefore my slice will be smaller, what you're really saying is that I don't believe the pie can be any bigger. And that is, that's bad for your business, to be quite frank. If you're a business person, that's just bad. And you're going to eventually fail and your business will collapse.
Dang,
and that is kind of the matter.
Just make it a
world.
party-sized pizza. You just make it a party-sized pizza. You have everyone there.
and get more pizza.
Maybe some people don't want pizza, and maybe you start building something else.
You get some sides. You get some chicken tenders.
Oh my god!
The possibilities are endless. Also, yeah, obviously we're hungry.
We're on all of these things.
All right. Yeah.
What are these days since I'll say this for you, Adam Ali, since all 6 of us are in Toronto, we should all get together and we should just do the wrap up live. We'll do the wrap up live.
Should.
We'll have like food. We'll have a spread. I think it'd be great.
We should all gather around your table.
We'll just all gather around that table.
My Viking table.
Yeah.
My coffee table. Yeah.
I think I may be the only one. Wait, Emma, have you seen the table?
I don't think
Daniel's table?
Yeah.
Have you been to my place? You've been to my place, right?
I've been to your place a bunch of times, but I don't know when you got
my coffee table.
If you changed tables. Oh no, I know your table.
Yeah, my coffee table.
I'm the only one here who's never seen the table.
Yeah.
That's because you don't live in Toronto.
I am really proud to have worked on Al-Qadim for so long. Unfortunately, last week was my final episode.
No!
Great. Viewership took a dip anyways from episode 2 on.
It's fine. Nobody understands our
did not.
inside jokes. But yeah, so I think I want to spin off of all that to go back to. So we talked about the moving goalpost, and we talked about like people trying to gatekeep. And we see companies and entities trying to push past that by using, cultural consults or by using a sensitivity reading. What ends up happening then is because we still don't have a sustainable structure for incorporating cultural consultations and sensitivity readings and editing into our products and our industry line, that they become scapegoats, because they are no longer part of the actual process. They are a band-aid solution that has come in and is therefore seen as an outsider influence, which for the gatekeepers is a very easy way to pin stuff onto people. Many of us have experienced this as people who have worked as that, and especially as more visible people in the space. I know, Daniel, you get a lot of this bullshit from people because you are often someone who calls people out on stuff.
Don't set up a YouTube channel. Don't manage a YouTube channel.
And people will go, wow, like if he hadn't said anything, this would have been fine, quote unquote. Like this would have been a problem.
You're a snitch.
I did the same thing for another product that happened. Like I very politely replied, hey, like, do you have any like cultural consults on your team at all? They're like, we have an Asian person, and I was like, and people started, seeing my reply and starting to also reply, and it built up until they eventually canceled that project because they realized they were not in a place to be putting that out.
Which one was this? Was this?
This was, God, I can't remember the
was
name.
Was this that like two years ago? It was that Cubicle 7 project?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was the Cubicle 7 project.
Yeah.
And I was very polite about it. I was like, hey, I'm kind of concerned about your artwork and the Jetpack 7.
Jetpack 7, that was it.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jetpack
Jackie.
7. And I was kind of like, hello, I'm kind of concerned. Do you have people involved? And their answer was really no. So what we're seeing here now is like, yes, we're seeing people starting to bring those in, but they bring people in very late. And they bring people as an outside influence to their process rather than as an intrinsic part of their process. And therefore they get backlash because, and then because, there are those fans that don't understand this, and we are shifting something in the industry, which means there are going to be growing pains. And therefore they are disincentivized to bring in those people and to listen to them and to therefore enact upon change. So it's this very vicious cycle. And sometimes the answer to a thing is to burn it down, unfortunately.
Yep. On the other end, there are companies that will say, use the presence of a cultural consultant as a stamp of approval.
Exactly.
That this is
rather
okay.
Than, actually incorporating their feedback or actually using their insights and knowledge to enact change. They use it as all right, we're cool. And like I said, cultural accuracy is not a hegemonic thing either. And they usually go, we will pick one person to be the voice of accuracy and non-insensitivity and everything. I'm like, that's not how it works here, bud. Like, you can't. Can't do that.
I've noticed as someone. I'm still going to say I'm new here. As someone new here,
you've been on this show for almost triple-digit hours.
I know, but I'm going to say to this scene, compared to all of the other people around me, I'm still new here. And really, I only started doing...
syndrome is sure impostering.
Yeah.
And I also just started doing consultancy not that long ago. But I will say that something I've noticed that happens a lot, I've seen it happen a lot with Japanese stuff in particular, is that they don't just bring in a person of that culture. There's this concept that there's authority within other people that outranks those of the culture that's being represented. This happens a lot with Japanese stuff. So someone who studied Japanese history and lived there for a year will, in a lot of cases, be seen as more of an authority, capital A, over someone like me who's mixed race Japanese Canadian, despite the fact that I've also lived in Japan for quite a while and do research there. It's this weird concept of who is the right person to be looking at this. And for cultural consultants, you would think it would be some of that culture, but it's not always. And if you're ever surprised about why there's backlash against projects that say they had cultural consultants, you have to look at who the consultant was and what their role was.
Yeah. And like which people, like which perspective are they bringing in, and like where exactly.
And let's also like note that some publishers, even like small creators, they're not even like a full-blown company, have very limited budgets. So while their project might be riddled with problems, a cultural consultant is not the answer for every single one of those, because they might not be able to even triage all of the problems into things that are actionable for the creator. Right? It's one of the things like I experienced with one of my first ever cultural consultancy gigs. One of the first ever ones I got, there were so many problems that each page was like Ahmed's highlighted Al-Qadim document. It's just like all red. And I was like, I am not going to be able to get through this in the time frame that you would like. Right? So cultural consultants kind of have to go through and like triage things and like, okay, here's like a critical focus. Like this content will cause harm. Here's like a recommended focus, right? This is like content that Asian consumers would really care about. And here's like something like a cautionary focus, right? Content that like, if you develop this further, it will cause problems. But right now, leave it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we still haven't really touched on is this industry is so new. We still have varying degrees of mixed definitions when it comes to the terms cultural consultant, sensitivity editor, and sensitivity reader. I tend to use pretty strict definitions, but some people's definitions may vary. A cultural consultant is usually there from day one or from earlier on in the project, and thus can make changes as they are coming about. A sensitivity editor is brought on late or at the end, but is empowered to make whatever changes they must. And a sensitivity reader can flag things, but not necessarily change them. So on your point that I'm a cultural consultant, I'd like to be, but so far I've only ever been hired as a sensitivity reader, and in one case, a sensitivity editor, where I am fixing things post-mortem, which is never ideal. Because again, like it comes down to, I now have a rapid deadline, and that deadline is the time by which it needs to publish. I'm not just beholden to you, a company, I'm beholden to whoever's publishing you or the house at which you're publishing. I have how many words to read? Anywhere from a couple thousand to well into the tens of thousands. And I usually have a couple hours to do it. I can't be paid enough because let's face it, very few people could pay a 30-hour rate, which is fair, per hour. And it comes down to I can give you this. I can do the best I can from my perspective in a very short amount of time. I can flag what needs to be gone, what could be changed, and I will give you some extra research time, maybe even pro bono, in my case, I've done that, to try and make sure my perspective is not as singular as mine normally is. So
there was something in the chat that I think we should bring up. Nikestem said a couple hours, and I will say, Nikestem, this is really common. Some people only have the budget for, like, we could hire you for, I don't know, 4 hours, $120 or $150, pay you for 4 hours, a lump sum or something, and that's all the time you have to work with. Now, ultimately, like I kind of disagree with the distinctions you've made, only because none of those really has control over what makes the final product. A consultant might be there from the very beginning, but they could be there for opinion, like just like visibility, right? And things you say may have an effect on what is written. But just because you say, okay,
depends on who you work with.
It really depends on what you work with, right? And if you're an editor or a reader, regardless, both of those, you, for the most part, are working on a copy of that final document and not the original document. So the changes that you propose, they are not obligated to actually make those changes. All right, they are not obligated to make those changes. And
this is go ahead. Go ahead. This actually brings up one of the things that I kind of wanted to just ask everyone about, and this is a great opportunity for me to pose the question to the group, which is, like, how do you know when you're comfortable putting your name on a project?
Emma and I had this conversation.
Hey, let's do it. But in front of everyone.
My answer has been 0 so far. I've not been credited officially on maybe one project, but I'm not 100% sure.
And I've only worked on so many, but it's something I've talked about upfront with them, to be like, I don't expect credit, but I assume you wouldn't hire me unless you wanted to be able to say that you did this process. And so I will specify that this is what I can offer. These are my terms. Also, I recognize that you're creators, like, you've made something, you've put effort and emotion into it, and I'm not here to just tear it apart. But also, I recognize I have very little power in the eventual outcome. So if my name goes in a credit somewhere, I needed to say that any of the final decisions were that of the writers and the original team. I just want that little disclaimer.
I think I've worked on.
That's fair.
I think I've worked on 15 projects as a cultural / sensitivity reader, editor, developmental editor, and
developmental editor.
There were 2 where I was like, do not put my name on this. One of them, they still put my name on it.
Oof.
but they did agree to change my title. And I've talked about this before. It's the project that I quit because I got brought onto this project, and oh my god, we just hit 1,000 followers on Twitch. Yay! Thank you, Mackenzie, not in Japan, for following. You're our 1,000th follower. Mackenzie, send me a DM on Twitch or on Twitter, and I'll send you something. Some cool TTRPG stuff. Anyways, I was brought into this project because they were looking for an Asian sensitivity reader, and prior to this gig, I had worked on one assignment, and it was one that Agatha and I both worked on, actually, and I don't think it ever got published. This was like years ago, like 2018. You might not even remember.
Yo, I don't recall this.
It was for a respected member of the community. I guess they just never published it. Anyways, I was looking for work in this kind of space, and I was a part of the IGDN, the Indie Game Developers Network. I have since left the IGDN, but they were basically like, I left because they communicate via email thread, and I just cannot handle that. And they put out an email being like, looking for an Asian sensitivity reader. And I was like, I'll do it.
But also narrow that down.
but I didn't think to narrow that down, right? This is a hard lesson that I learned. And I took the gig, and they were like, okay, we'll pay you $5,000 US. And I was like, oh, damn, okay. I went from a gig where I got paid $90 to $5,000.
Gotta say, for people unfamiliar with this scene, like, that's a lot of money for consultancy.
And I was like, oh damn. Mm-hmm. And I said yes because of the money, right? And started talking about the project, and they were like, so you're Korean, right? And I was like, oh, shit. So you're Korean, right? And then I was like, oh, fuck, what I get into? And it ended up being like a Korean project. And I was like, I cannot be a sensitivity reader on this. But also inside, I was like, I would also very much like this money. So I was like, here's the deal. I will not take all of that money. And you will take that money and you will pay a Korean specialist. Preferably somebody in Korea. Here's Sangjun Park's contact information. Right? Sangjun is so dope. And I was like, but I could still help you out with this project because I skimmed it. And I was like, there are a lot of things that are very wrong from a D&D perspective that I can help you with. So please do not call me your sensitivity editor. Call me your developmental editor, and I'll help you with the game design part of it. So I ended up working on that. And it was still one of the most deeply stressful projects I've ever worked on, and I actually quit.
I remember the whole process. Like, every time we recorded anything together, you'd be like bringing up your top shit and scrolling through it.
And it was tough. And so I was like, and it was in that, after that gig, I became very, very selective about what I worked on. Either I worked on something because I respected the person, or because it was very clear that I was the specialist for it. I also started to see things in the TTRPG industry, in our own community, where people tend to be like, I am the Asian sensitivity reader, and I edit all things Asian. And that shit bothers me so much, because that kind of rhetoric is also deeply problematic. If you say that, like, I will cover South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, Japan, China, I'll cover them all because I have an East Asian studies degree, or whatever you want to say, like, is also deeply problematic, because while you may be profiting and you might be helping the industry from your perspective, there are also a host of other people out there who are far more qualified than you. And so after that gig, I started passing on things to people. And I also
got me into this.
Which got into this, but I also have the luxury of this not being my livelihood.
Yeah.
I recognize I have the privilege of that.
Yeah. Just to make this like sort of instructive for people who are writing things and creating stuff, and you don't know where to start with finding a consultant or a sensitivity reader. And it's daunting because if you don't know someone specific, where do you start? You have to see this argument or this excuse that it's just like, there just isn't anyone out there, or I couldn't find someone. Do you have some general suggestions on how people go about finding the appropriate cultural consultant or sensitivity reader?
Yeah.
I have advice.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I mean, this is kind of like, I don't know how everyone else will feel about this, but I do feel like personally, if someone were to reach out to me and, you know, like word in a way where they're like, I need a, or first of all, you could tweet. And that's a great way to go about it. Now that I understand the wonders of Twitter. Or also you could sometimes ask like someone that you know is a cultural consultant and ask if they know anyone who is like of this specific background expertise that you are looking for. And generally, like if someone were to ask me, I'd be very happy to refer whoever I actually know to this person. That's not a huge deal to me. So I feel like those, or you could tweet and do the same thing, tweet and tag people. But that's how I would recommend people go about it.
It's also like, if you're in a position where you can hire multiple for a smaller amount of time, each, or one for a larger amount of time, my argument, and this is an argument I've actually made, go with multiple. So from my perspective, as a person who is deeply diasporic, so I've got roots from India all the way to East Africa, which for anyone who doesn't know, that's a large part of the planet. Just crosses two different continents at that point. And I'm also a British Canadian, so I got perspective from those places as well, which add two more continents to that mix. Oh boy, that's fun. I can give you a breadth of several different cultures if necessary. I can go in depth into a couple of them. Moreover, the best solution when you want to hire me, it's, hey, I need you to help cover areas where we don't think we're covered enough, or I want you to work alongside someone to give a different perspective. And I'm more than happy to do that. I'd love to work with more people as a cultural consultant, especially because I know that my perspective may not be enough for your specific project. I'd love to work alongside someone because I know I can still give valuable input. The other thing is that sometimes you're not gonna find someone after all that work. Yes, try and go with the best as, but ask yourself this: why do you want to make this project in the first place?
Always that.
If you're having trouble finding sources, why are you making it? And usually the response I've gotten back more often than not is, well, I've got some people, and I if you're one of these people, by the way, I'm not calling you out because I completely get it. I've got some people who can understand this from a historical perspective, but not from a fantasy perspective. And if I were a lesser man, I would immediately just point to Emma, wave my arms frantically, and say, historical turned fantasy. I am not a lesser person, so I will say this: historical perspectives give you quite a lot. Quite a lot. And you never have to take everything we do and apply it anyway. So why not go for the historical perspective?
Yeah. And I think there's a really important thing to note is that sometimes you will bring in on someone to look at your project. And sometimes the answer is it can't go forward. I actually had a very good conversation with the creator of Heroes of the Orient, which was a product on DM's Guild.
I did too.
About this. And he was rightly called out for, the Orientalism in his products. And what I knew, and I like, there's a thing I say that like, you can engage in Orientalist stuff and not be a bad person because it happens, because Orientalism is baked into our societal system, and our default is to engage in that behavior. So he was called out on it, and he responded by going and asking people, like known people in the community space. So me, I think also you, Daniel.
We talked for hours.
Yeah, and he was like, "Hey, so you're right. This is not a good product. What do I do here?" And I am currently in a space where I'm not taking on cultural consultancies and stuff like that because I'll touch on at the moment I'm not doing it right now. And I was like, hey, so I'm not really going to do this job for you. I can look for other people, but just from looking at it, you're going to have to go from ground one. Like, you're going to have to go back to the foundations of it and fix those foundations first before you can move forward. And he was very understanding of that. And there are a lot of people who are not. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with knowing that if your foundation is cracked, the rest of your creation is also going to carry that through, carry those faults in. And you need to be willing to either go back and fix those foundations. And that often means, and what he actually did is he took down Heroes of the Orient and his other Orientalist work off of his DM's Guild, despite the fact that it was his best-selling work. And
I developed a lot of respect for him from the conversations that we had.
Yeah.
He was like, okay, I'm going to go look and see if I can. And then the other step is this my story to tell? And he started, from last I spoke to him about like a year ago, he was looking into potential Asian collaborators to bring on to see what they could do there.
He wanted to bring it back. I think the big thing about, one thing to also touch on is that in the conversations that I had with him was that he genuinely did not know that what he wrote was bad. He didn't know. He also lives in Europe. So, you know, his interactions with Asian people where he lived were also limited. So I think that's really important to consider, that like, just because a sensitivity reader or editor or cultural consultant or whatever you want to call it calls out your work for problematic content, it doesn't make you bad, right? You need to be able to sit back and objectively evaluate your piece of work.
Yeah,
because
how
ultimately,
you respond. Yeah, it's all how you respond, right? Like that's what made Land of the Rising Sun such a pinnacle of bad behavior, because instead of listening to the criticism, they doubled down and they defended themselves, and that's not the right behavior. If someone is saying, "Hey, you're hurting people," you don't go, "What? No, I'm not." Like, if I punch somebody,
you're hurting people.
Yeah, if I punch somebody right now, and they go, "Okay, that hurt," I could be like, "No, it didn't."
Yeah,
I'd be really. What would that even mean, right? And so, like, it's all about what is that constructive behavior, and people need to be okay with separating out, calling out problematic stuff in your content. It's not necessarily saying that you are a problematic person. We live in a problematic society. We live in a society that is bigoted in so many different ways. Of course, that's going to bleed over into some stuff. But if you don't take that opportunity to improve, that is a tell of your character. And that is a tell of who you are as a person and where your values are. And that's what it is. If your values are not in making as good of a product as you can be, that also includes, removing problematic content. And you have to make that judgment call, and people will judge you for that.
Yeah, that's your legacy, right? That is your legacy. I think it's. Go ahead, Emma.
Just gonna say, like, I can't speak for all consultants, but we are people, and if you hire someone who is BIPOC or queer, marginalized in some way, you gotta remember that we're used to pushback when we bring up things that are harmful. And also, a lot of us are creators of some sort, and so know that it's hard to open yourself up for criticism. But this is supposed to be constructive criticism. We wouldn't sign on if we didn't want to help you make something better. And every time I've ever done a consultation, I sweat over my response that I'm about to send, because I'm like, what if they say this? I'm going to have to argue this back, or like, am I going to have to fight? Like, I'm so used to having my perspective disrespected or pushed aside. And so there's fear on both sides, the fear of being criticized, and then the fear of pushback, of offering perspective and trying to work together. So we're not just here to like ruin everything for you and all of your hopes and dreams. And honestly, if someone signed on to your project in the first place, it means they think that there's hope for this being something worth sharing and ultimately selling or playing.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like Palpatine in the third episode of Star Wars, where I'm saying, use my knowledge, I beg you.
Let the hate flow through you.
No, not that one. Not that one. It's when he's talking to Anakin, is like, use my knowledge, except you're literally paying me for it. That's the joke here. Or I have decided to donate you my time, because I've done some free consulting from time to time. Like, use what I have. I brought this for you, and I did it with the goodness of my heart, especially if it's free. So use it. Because believe it or not, I'm not Palpatine. This isn't the dark side. It's just decades of collected knowledge and wisdom and experience and trauma, honestly, that I have and that I'm willing to make palatable so you can understand it and use it effectively so you don't harm people. And that is the greatest gift anyone can give, and the hardest job anyone can do in some cases, especially in this industry. So respect that immense amount of work. Yeah. Adam Lee's Helpatine. No.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know,
excellent.
all of our conversation here and anywhere on Twitter or any of that stuff, we don't do it for fun. This is not like a casual thing that we're putting out into the world, right? We're doing this because we hope that the industry or certain products or creators are going to be able to do better with the information we are putting out there and the conversations we are having. Like, I don't know about you. I don't call out people for problematic behavior because it's a fun thing for me.
No, because it makes you a target.
Exactly.
It's freaking stressful.
Like, it's a very stressful, and like, we need to respect that, and we need to, this is a bigger industry problem, so we need to figure out how do we incorporate people into that process? How do we make it an industry standard to make that the process of having A, the right people tell the right stories, and B, have the right people involved to make sure that products are as best as they can be. And that includes cultural consultations, that includes sensitivity editing and reading, that includes incorporating people of that culture or identity that you're examining right at to the beginning and right into the actual creative execution of it. So yeah, like, we're just here to help make things better, hopefully.
And I think it also means like knowing when to just step back and not do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because you might be compelled to be like, oh, I don't see this out there, I'm going to do it. I feel the call, right? Sometimes, that call is a lie.
Yeah.
They just kind of step back and, kind of.
And you can use that same power, that same drive to help support other people by, funding their projects or, paying, marginalized identity people and creators for their games, and empowering people through your platforms. And, just because you aren't the one telling the story does not mean that you can't help the story come to life.
Absolutely.
There's the amount of opportunities I see, and I've actually seen this a couple times in our community, in the smaller spaces, where someone's like, my partner has a story but they don't know how to write it. So I want to write it. Can I do that? And I'm like, well, then your partner is your consultant. Your partner is your co-writer. You are ghostwriting. That is it's a legitimate thing in the writing industry. Take advantage of that, framework. Ghostwrite for people if it comes down to it. If you really want to tell someone else's story because it's that impactful to you, there are ways you can support that with your money, with your time, and with your experience. So be that kind person who is the Helpatine and holds out his hands and says, use my knowledge, I beg you.
The Helpatine.
I will.
Helpatine is like part of Asian represent lore now.
Yeah, Should we just do? Are we gonna do a Star Wars AP? And it's like
we just need to like a little.
I have so many
now.
I have so many ideas, Steve. I know we shouldn't do it.
You talk about Star Wars so often that I feel like that is the inaugural when Asian represent go back to a con. It'll be a Star Wars panel that Asian represent host because I feel like
Star Wars
Dan,
live
can I
play.
just say? Can I just say I have never watched any Star Wars thing
That's
before.
fine.
Yeah.
But if we are ever doing anything that is Star Wars related, I will watch it just for the show.
Asians watch Star Wars.
Oh gosh, I love those. I will definitely make a lot of commentary. If
I would go to a panel that is just
who's this Jar Jar Binks?
Daniel explains the Star Wars cinematic universe, and Agatha gets full range of like hitting the big red button, like pause. Explain this more. That to me
should
would
we
bring
get
me a lot
Agatha
of
a
joy.
pause button? We should get Agatha a pause button. For cons.
It's just like we just get the staples button of that was easy.
That was easy.
Yeah. But this one is like pause. I need you to explain more.
I feel like it would just be like
those
hold up. That's the Agatha thing. Hold up.
I'm picturing those little signs, but like put actual like cat paws on it. You put them up and it's paws.
Oh, that's so cute. I was thinking I was hoping that I could press the button and then it would just be pew, 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 pew.
Well, I was pew 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 or air horn.
Well, we should have a soundboard for Agatha. That's what we really need.
Yeah.
We did a summer job. But sorry, before we close out, because I have one more thing to say about like, this whole cultural consulting thing. I wanted to add in from actually a business point of view, because I know a lot of folks out there, myself included, the idea of like getting money is a very good metric. Like the amount of revenue you generate is actually a metric you can measure, and it oftentimes can be how you want to measure your success. And it's valid. It has other problems, but like, it is a measurement. So I can get along with that. Likewise, I can get along with like gathering data and things like that. As a business consultant, this idea of like bringing on consultants to help you like make changes to your business model to make more money, that is common. That has been happening for 100 years, probably more, but I only know about 100 years of history. That said, in business, do you think P&G like credits their consultants? Probably not. They don't need to flex that they have like consultants. Unilever doesn't need to do that. Frito-Lay doesn't need to do that. But they hire them and they listen to them. And the reason they listen to them is because they come up and they say, well, how much risk are you willing to like absorb? And how much revenue are you looking to generate? And cultural consultants generally can't make those kind of considerations. And that's okay, because it's your job really as a brand. But that said, they can lay out the options that you might be oblivious to. And at the end of the day, if you're a business and you're not willing to take risks, I'm sorry to say, you will likely plateau in your revenue, and people will start asking you really hard questions like, why are you looking at X% this year over 2021? And if you're not listening to your consultants, you're not hiring consultants, you're stagnating in the space, and that is bad for your business. So hire consultants. Don't look to flex with their names, because no one does that, and it shows your own weakness in the marketplace. But definitely look to them.
I'll also say this.
Steve.
I'll also say this as somebody who works in for a big company. You should go beyond hiring consultants as well, and you should put, you should have diverse voices in positions of power. And I think that's also something that needs to be said. That's it. Like, we could have this conversation. We could go on for hours. We can go for hours.
See y'all next week.
But it's time to wrap up this episode. It's time to wrap up this episode. It's time to wrap up the episode. Okay, sorry, I was reading our Zoom chat and I was like, so it's time to wrap up this episode. You know what? I'm so happy that we got to have this conversation, because I know this is like just one of many times that we will be talking about this. Just like we will never be done talking about Orientalism. We will continue to talk about this. What will next week hold? We'll find out. You'll have to stay tuned to see what happens, because the wrap up is all about, you know, what's currently happening in our space. So that said, I wanna thank all of y'all for joining us for this stream. Thank you for all the people who follow us, who sub, who gift subs to others. You know, we really appreciate that. You know, any money that Asians Represent makes just goes right back into the community. We're trying to be very purposeful with what we do with it. So just want to let y'all know that.
Yeah, the next investment is going to be a soundboard.
For Agatha. For all of the live shows. But, you know, but also I think we need to do an eating stream soon. Almost like I personally would like to do a food stream next week. But it's up to...
We should save her for Lunar New Year.
So
I mean, what's to say we can't do both? We can't do next week and then Lunar New Year.
I mean, dumpling stream?
Next week makes a lot of sense.
I think I gotta make dumplings for Lunar New Year.
We have a panel. Agatha, did you know we have a panel?
Oh yeah, I forgot.
Daniel, do you know we got a panel coming up?
No, I forgot. But I heard that there is this amazing online convention called Session Zero Con.
Yeah.
How could you forget? How irresponsible of you.
I know, I'm terrible. I'm also speaking at
I remember when it's my turn.
I'm speaking on a thing tomorrow, actually, for some American fan thing, and I don't even know what it's called.
I'm glad you remembered.
That's some solid advertisement, Daniel.
So I'm, you know, but yeah, Session Zero Con. Agatha, Steve, and I are talking about building your TTRPG media empire.
Empire?
Oh. I don't know.
That's Emperor Palpatine, right? I know Star Wars references.
No.
Emperor Palpatine? Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Like that's not a line. Okay,
I like to think I'm like the Qui-Gon Jinn of Asians Represent. If we're gonna go for a movie.
I don't know who you're talking about. Anyway, so we'll be on Session Zero Con. Come check us out. Really, go sign up.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about focus. Okay, we're gonna talk about like how we built Asians Represent and what we've been doing with Asians Represent and our plans for the future, what we've done to kind of build this community and everything organically. So I'm super excited for that. I'm just super excited to attend because that's gonna be so strong. It's gonna be like this huge strong force for good in the community, because I think conventions and small conventions and large conventions will change dramatically in the future because of it. So yeah, go to sessionzerocon.com, check it out. We got panels, there are booths, we're gonna be hanging out. I can't wait. That said, just like we do at the end of every live stream, one of our mods or Steve is gonna put that Discord invite in our Twitch chat. Join. I think we got less than 20 spaces left in our Discord community. If you are watching this and you are in a different time zone and you cannot tune in live, let us know. You can DM us at AZNS Represent on Twitter, and we'll get an invite sent to you. Likewise, you could also just message myself, Steve, Agatha, and we got you. That's it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this episode of The Wrap Up. Kiana, Emma, Adam Ali, their socials are underneath. It's on the screen. Kiana asks, Werewolf Feels, Starchiologist. Follow them, hire them, collaborate with them, learn from them. And we'll see you next time.
Hi.
Or just say hi. Bye, everyone.
We're just vibing.
We're just vibing. Bye.